Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude to the Sufan Center and the Qatar International Academy for Security Studies and the State of Qatar for inviting Indonesia to this important event, the 2024 Global Security Forum, with the theme Strategic Competition, the Complexity of Interdependence. It is indeed an honor for me, representing the National Counter-Terrorism Agency of Indonesia, to be here focusing on the theme Countering Terrorism in the context of strategic competition. Indonesia believes that the theme provides the impetus for us to grapple the evolving nature of terrorism within the context of great power rivalries, particularly in understanding how we are able to withstand these challenges. For this, Indonesia believes that the spirit of multilateralism through international cooperation is instrumental. Distinguished participants, the spirit of multilateralism has been advocated by the UN since the adoption of the Global Counterterrorism Strategy in 2006. The strategy focuses on 4 pillars. First, addressing the conditions conducive to terrorism. Second, preventing and combating terrorism. Third, assisting states in their capacity to address terrorism. And fourth, ensuring CT efforts do not work against the respect for human rights and rule of law. Furthermore, in 2016, the Secretary General of the UN came about with an action plan focusing on preventing violent extremism under the premises of taking preventive measures to directly address the drivers of violent extremism. Thus far, after more than 20 years, the spirit of multilateralism in addressing terrorism can be summed up by or through 3 important developments. First, norm settings and imposing obligations for states to suppress terrorism. For this, we note that states are obligated to criminalize acts of terrorism, including terrorist financing. States are obligated to deter movements of terrorists by strengthening their border security. And third, states are obligated to garner international cooperation by, among others, sharing of information. And also, we see the establishment of UN Security Council Resolution 1540, where states are obligated that non-state actors could obtain weapons of mass destruction, including those of terrorists. Second, imposing sanctions on terrorists and terrorist organizations. We note, for example, the establishment of UN Security Council Resolution 1267, which establishes a UN sanctions list on Al-Qaeda and ISIL, particularly of individuals and entities, including their affiliates, where states are obligated to freeze assets without delay, travel restrictions, and of course, arms embargo. Third, proposing new paradigms of actions, as I've mentioned before, such as addressing the drivers of violent extremism, including addressing the issues conducive to or the root causes of terrorism. These strategic policies, including actions taken, were under the guise of the UNCT framework, reiterating that terrorism is a threat to international peace and security, human rights, and overall development. Distinguished participants, in a sense, throughout more than 20 years, the multilateral efforts were focused on non-state actors, namely ISIL and Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. Various discussions yesterday also pinpointed the loss acquitted by these international terrorist organizations, such as the loss of territory for ISIL in 2019, and including the loss of leadership within these 2 terrorist groups. Take an example from my region in Southeast Asia, where the UN Secretary General report in 2023 highlighted that the influence of ISIL has receded, particularly in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. This was bolstered by the effective security enforcement within the region. Although a worrying sign was reported by the UN monitoring team in February this year of the resurgence of Jama'ah Islamiyah, or GI, affiliated to Al-Qaeda, and Jama'ah Ansarud-Daulah, affiliated to ISIL in the region itself. This reminds me of yesterday's portrayal by the Deputy Director of FBI, having said that they never really went away. We are now also confronted by their influence in other spheres of the world, such as ISIL Khorasan in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula or in Yemen, and their affiliates, particularly in the Sahel region, is worrisome. In this regard, two factors come to mind in their sphere of influence. First, their ideological influence still remains, such as in Southeast Asia. And second, their operational and tactical influence of creating new wilayats or territories, such as in Khorasan, Afghanistan, and in the Sahel region, the latter being reported to be the new epicenter of terrorism. Bearing in mind of the above and the challenges we are facing against terrorism, I should say that we are not yet out of the woods. Distinguished participants, last year, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, presented his policy brief on a new agenda for peace, outlining vision of multilateral efforts for peace and security based on international law for a world in transition. It was highlighted that threats are growing beyond the ability of any single state to manage, and terrorism is just one of them. We are finding ourselves in the midst of a geopolitical shift while facing a web of interconnected challenges stemming from climate change, the spread of deadly viruses, and the activities of criminals and terrorists. We have witnessed the aggression in Ukraine and the worrying escalation in Gaza and its surrounding in the region, which affects and undermines many of our principles and efforts that have harbored significant progress in security and prosperity over the past few years. For our part, as we understand from the challenges we are facing today, a world polarized, a multipolar world, and a world divided by rivalries, it may be the push for violent extremist groups to feed on. Against this backdrop, the Agenda for Peace provides us with a common agenda to move beyond the common logic of competition and find avenues for cooperation and collective action to pursue shared interests. Distinguished participants, in conclusion, as we look at terrorism today, conflict, rivalries, and power competitions are the enabling environment for violent extremism and terrorism to flourish. For the past 20 years, the multilateral mechanism has built a sound platform for states to garner international cooperation. Moreover, strategic multilateral policies such as conflict prevention, community engagement, women's empowerment, youth empowerment, respect for human rights, and rule of law provides a solid foundation for means to counter terrorism, including when and where strategic competition comes to fore. We have shaped the tools in the spirit of multilateralism, and we have the means in finding a durable solution to the problems we are facing today. No country can do this alone. International cooperation is and will always be a prerequisite for peace, stability, security, and prosperity. I thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.